The air in the pediatric wing smelled perpetually of antiseptic and stale coffee, a cold, sterile reality that offered no comfort to Leo. He was slumped against the cream-colored wall outside the cardiac unit, his 30-year-old body feeling 80 years too old. Inside, behind the thick glass, his daughter Lily lay small and still. She was only 7, and her heart, the engine of her tiny life, was failing. Dr. Harris was a man of science, not sentiment. He didn't mince words. "Mr. Thorne," the doctor had said 10 minutes ago, his voice echoing Leo's desperation. "The immediate care is covered, but the valve replacement surgery, that requires a specialist flown in from Europe. We're talking $500,000, payable up front." $500,000. The number hammered against Leo's skull like a relentless fist. His entire net worth was a worn pickup truck, $300 in savings, and a mountain of medical debt. He wasn't even a janitor. He worked odd jobs, hauling scrap metal just to keep the lights on. $500,000 was a world away. It was an impossibility carved in stone. He pulled a faded, crinkled photograph from his wallet, Lily, smiling fiercely. A gap where her 2 front teeth used to be. The smile was fire. The doctor's words were ice. "I can't lose you, little bird." He swore, pressing the photo to his weary eyes. "I'd sell my soul before I let that happen." He felt a deep, primal panic rising, but he choked it down. He couldn't afford to be weak. He had to think. He had to find a loophole in destiny, a way to cheat the system that had cornered him. He needed a miracle, and he needed it yesterday. The hospital clock ticked loudly, each second stealing more time from Lily. He stood up, running his hands over his face. He knew the answer wasn't waiting in the antiseptic air of the hospital. It was somewhere dirty, desperate, and probably illegal. He pulled out his phone. The screen cracked like a shattered mirror, and typed a single, desperate phrase into the search bar. "Quick money. No questions asked." Leo spent the next 12 hours chasing shadows. He was promised loans with 50% interest, illegal blood donations, and even work that involved breaking kneecaps. He rejected them all, his shame outweighing his desperation. He wouldn't compromise his morality. Lily wouldn't deserve money stained by crime. He finally found himself in a dingy 24-hour diner at 4 in the morning, nursing a cup of watery coffee that tasted like regret. He needed focus. He needed clarity. He picked up the discarded business section of yesterday's newspaper left on the counter. Most of it was filled with news about the Everhart Corporation, the monolithic entity that seemed to own half the state, but tucked away at the bottom of the classifieds, half obscured by a coffee stain, was an advertisement that made the blood run cold in his veins. Immediate requirement. Discreet groom, age 30 to 40. Male, must have clean history and no current spouse. Compensation. $50 million net. Condition marriage contract, 1-year term. Absolute discretion required. All existing debts will be settled immediately. Contact the Everhart legal office. $50 million, not $500,000. $50 million. Leo stared at the number, his mind reeling. Was this a joke? Was it a bizarre scam? The condition marriage contract felt cold and deeply unsettling. But the inclusion of the Everhart legal office and the promise to pay off all existing debts made it sound terrifyingly real. It wasn't a question of selling his soul now. It was a question of selling his life. A contract. A performance. Could he pretend to be a husband to a stranger for a year, knowing that the price was Lily's life? He crumpled the paper in his hand. He rushed out of the diner, the newspaper still clutched tightly in his fist. He had the address, he knew what he had to do. He didn't look up as he crossed the street, narrowly missing a sleek, black limousine with tinted windows. The limo driver, a giant of a man, honked, leaned out, and then gave Leo a long, assessing look before speeding away. The Everhart corporate tower was a cathedral of wealth, all polished chrome and silent marble. Leo felt the coldness seep into his threadbare jacket as he was escorted into a penthouse office that spanned the entire top floor. Waiting for him was Amelia Everhart. She was stunning. Her blonde hair was a perfect wave, her designer dress impeccable, and her face, though pale, was a masterpiece of cold beauty. But she was seated in a sophisticated, motorized wheelchair. Her lower body was draped elegantly, motionless. Next to her sat a severe-looking lawyer who slid a thick document across the glass desk. "You're Leo Thorne," Amelia stated, her voice sharp and devoid of warmth. "You look desperate. Good." Leo's throat was dry. "I need $500,000 for my daughter's surgery. I saw the ad." Amelia raised a sculpted eyebrow. "The ad was not placed for the needy, Mr. Thorne. It was placed for someone disposable. The contract is simple. 1 year of marriage. You must move into my estate immediately. You will accompany me to all social functions and act as my devoted husband, particularly in front of my Uncle Robert." "Why?" Leo asked, gripping the edge of the desk. "I am paralyzed and without an heir. My family is circling like vultures," she explained, her gaze chillingly direct. "They want my fortune. If I die unmarried, my uncle takes the company. I need a husband on paper to secure my board position and deter the vultures. You are temporary." The lawyer spoke. "The moment you sign, $500,000 is wired directly to St. Jude's Hospital. The total compensation is $50 million upon successful completion of the 1-year term. However," he paused, adjusting his glasses, "if Miss Everhart passes away during the term, the entire inheritance is yours, tax-free. You become the CEO." Leo stared at the contract, then at the beautiful woman, then at the number. He didn't want $50 million. He just wanted Lily to live. Leo picked up the pen. He didn't read the fine print. He signed his name with a trembling hand, sealing his life to a cold, heartless pact. As he finished, Amelia leaned forward, her cold blue eyes locking onto his. "Welcome to the family, husband," she said. "Your old life ends now, and I suggest you pray, I live to see the end of this year." The wedding was not a celebration. It was a transaction witnessed by a notary and Amelia's lawyer. It took place in the penthouse library, a room paneled in dark, silent wood, smelling of old leather and wealth. Leo wore a rented suit that felt stiff and foreign against his skin. Amelia, stunning in a simple white silk dress designed to drape perfectly over her paralyzed legs, signed the documents with a diamond pen. The moment the ink dried, the lawyer produced a tablet. "Check your phone, Mr. Thorne. $500,000 has been wired to St. Jude's Hospital. Lily's surgery is scheduled for this afternoon." Relief, so intense it was dizzying, washed over Leo. He didn't care about the $50 million now. Lily was safe. That was the only reality that mattered. He didn't look at Amelia, he looked at his phone screen, confirming the transfer. He felt no connection to the beautiful woman who was now his wife on paper. "Your room is in the East Wing," Amelia said, her voice cutting through his euphoria. "You are expected to maintain the image of a devoted husband at all times. This includes physical proximity at family gatherings. Do not, under any circumstance, mention Lily or your previous life." Leo nodded, the weight of the contract settling heavily on his shoulders. He was an actor in a gilded cage. Later that afternoon, a chauffeur delivered Leo to the Everhart estate, a palace of manicured lawns and sweeping stone. He was met by Mrs. Albright, the stone-faced housekeeper, who handed him a new wardrobe and a schedule. His new life felt like an expensive, suffocating prison. That night, alone in a bedroom larger than his entire previous apartment, Leo finally received a call from Dr. Harris. "The surgery was a complete success, Mr. Thorne," the doctor confirmed. "Your daughter is stable." Leo sank onto the silk sheets, a single tear tracing a path through the grime he hadn't yet washed from his hands. Lily was alive, but he had paid for her life with his own. The first required public performance was dinner. The dining room was immense, lit by a chandelier that cast sharp, cold light. Leo, uncomfortable in a new tailored suit, sat beside Amelia at the head of the table. Across from them sat Uncle Robert Everhart, a man with a heavy jowl and a politician's oily charm, and his gaunt wife, Clarissa. "Amelia, my dear," Uncle Robert boomed, raising his wine glass. "Such a hasty wedding, but chapeau to you for finding a suitable companion." He paused, his eyes drilling into Leo. "What was it you did again, Mr. Thorne Plumbing Landscaping?" "I worked in logistics and manual labor," Leo replied, keeping his voice steady as Amelia stared impassively at her plate. "Manual labor," Clarissa tittered, covering her mouth with a napkin. "So refreshing, I suppose we can expect the lawns to be immaculate now." "Amelia, dear." Uncle Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper designed for everyone to hear. "We all know why he's here. Amelia, that $50 million clause, he's counting your breaths. Niece, waiting for the final curtain. A man like that, marrying a cripple. Well, he must be desperate. We all know you're terminal. Amelia, why pretend?" Leo felt a surge of rage, not for himself, but for Amelia's dignity. The contract forbade him from defending himself or her family name. He forced himself to look down at his food, clenching his fists under the table. Amelia finally lifted her head. Her blue eyes were blazing, not with sadness, but with cold fury directed at her uncle. "Robert," she said, her voice ice, "Leo isn't counting my breaths. He is securing my legacy, and I suggest you stop counting his money. Unlike you, he earned his way to this table. Now, my husband will feed me because my hands are tired." It was a deliberate, humiliating command, forcing Leo to feed her like a helpless child in front of the vultures. The command in Chapter 5. Forcing him to feed her had been painful, both for Leo and Amelia, but it had achieved its purpose, shutting down Uncle Robert's attack. Later that evening, after the family had departed, Amelia needed assistance transferring from her wheelchair to the bed. Her private nurse was off, and the house staff was terrified of touching her. Leo knew it was part of his duty now. He didn't treat her like a package or a patient. He treated her with the careful, practiced tenderness he used when lifting Lily. He lifted her strong, still torso, and gently laid her against the silk pillows. He adjusted her cushions, ensuring her legs were comfortable. It was a chore, but he performed it with genuine care. "Thank you," Amelia whispered, her voice surprisingly small in the vast room. Leo nodded, ready to leave. "Good night, Amelia." "Wait," she said. "My spine is damaged, Leo, but not my pride. You didn't have to be gentle. You could have been rough. My last companion was." "I don't know how to be rough with someone who is dependent on me," Leo said simply, turning away. "I am a father Tenderness is a habit, not a performance. He didn't see her face, but she watched his silhouette as he moved towards the door. Then, Amelia pressed a button on the remote beside her. The lights dimmed, and soft music filled the room, a gentle classical piece. "Stay," Amelia ordered, the cold returning to her voice. "Read to me. You are contractually obligated to provide emotional comfort." Leo sighed internally, knowing he couldn't refuse. He picked up the heavy volume on the nightstand. As he began to read, he didn't realize that Amelia wasn't listening to the words, but to the deep, steady rhythm of his voice, the sound of true, safe devotion she hadn't heard since her accident. Leo sat alone in the opulent sunroom, surrounded by tapestries and artifacts worth millions, but his gaze was fixed on the single, small object in his hand, his phone. Lily was recovering. The hospital had sent a short video message. She was pale, but she was smiling that gap-toothed, fierce smile that had cost him his life of freedom. "I miss you, Papa. When are you coming home from your very important job?" she signed in the short clip, her hands moving weakly but clearly. Leo swallowed, the lump in his throat too painful to ignore. He sent a text back, dictated carefully to the voice-to-text program, "Soon, little bird, Papa is closing a very big deal that will keep us safe forever. Be brave." He couldn't visit her. The contract forbade unauthorized absences, and Amelia, though distant, demanded his presence to maintain the facade of their marriage. He was now her most expensive accessory. He was trapped, but the fear that had driven him was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady determination. Lily was safe. Now, he just had to survive the year. He looked at the vast, empty garden outside, feeling the weight of the Everhart name, a name he wore like a poorly fitted mask. He was a caretaker, but his true purpose, fatherhood, was confined to a 10-second video clip. He sighed, standing up to check on Amelia. He'd found himself doing that more often lately, long after his required duties were finished. It wasn't pity. It was a shared sense of entrapment. She was paralyzed by her body. He was paralyzed by his promise. As Leo reached the end of the corridor, he noticed the doors to Amelia's private study were ajar. He heard a voice, not Amelia's, but Uncle Robert's. It was low, venomous, and focused on Amelia's private affairs. Leo froze, realizing he was about to overhear something he shouldn't. The dinner party was held to announce Amelia's recovery from a recent flu, but Uncle Robert used it as a launch pad for his attack. He had clearly been drinking, his face flushed and his eyes holding a nasty, calculating glint. "To the happy couple," Uncle Robert slurred, raising his crystal glass, "and to the wonderful new life of Mr. Thorne, who traded a mop bucket for a Rolls-Royce." The polite laughter around the table died quickly. "Robert," Amelia warned, her voice tight, "that's quite enough." Is it really enough?" Uncle Robert pressed, ignoring her. He fixed his gaze on Leo, who was sitting silently beside Amelia. "Tell me, Thorne, now that your daughter is fixed, we heard about the surgery. Quite expensive. Wasn't it? What exactly is your role here? Amelia is a brilliant CEO, but she can't exactly provide an heir, can she? So, are you her trophy, or are you simply a very expensive nurse?" Leo felt the blood drain from his face. The insult was brutal, cutting straight to the core of his sacrifice and his humiliation. He desperately wanted to lash out, to defend his honor, but he was bound by the contract. He risked everything if he retaliated. "He is my husband," Amelia declared, her hand slamming the table. Uncle Robert just chuckled, a deep, vile sound. "A husband on paper, Dear, we all know the truth. You found a man low enough on the social ladder to accept a check in exchange for wiping your chin and pushing your chair. He is a glorified employee. Amelia, a kept man, nothing more. Robert leaned back, satisfied with the damage. He smiled at Leo. Tell me, janitor, when she dies, and you inherit everything, will you keep the same staff, or will you fire the help who saw you crawling out of the gutter? Amelia gasped, not in anger, but in pain. She clutched the side of her head, her face turning ashen white. The insult was the final straw. It wasn't the words directed at Leo that broke Amelia. It was the realization that her family still saw her as broken, as someone who needed to buy affection. "Get out!" Amelia screamed, her voice hoarse, her CEO authority finally shattering the cold facade. "All of you, get out of my house!" But the emotional exertion was too much. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and her body slumped heavily against the restraints of the motorized wheelchair. The sound of her collapse was sickeningly soft. Panic erupted around the table. "Amelia, Amelia!" Leo immediately pushed the table aside, ignoring the terrified screams of the guests. Uncle Robert, suddenly sobered, shouted, "Call the staff! Get the doctor!" Leo didn't wait for staff, he didn't wait for anyone. He saw the limp figure of his wife, his contractual wife, and his fatherly instincts took over. He reached down and gently, expertly, unbuckled the straps securing her to the chair. He scooped her weightless body into his arms. "Don't touch her!" he roared at Uncle Robert, his voice cracking with a fierce protective emotion that was undeniably genuine. He didn't care about the contract, the money, or the inheritance. He cared about the fragile life in his arms. He raced through the opulent hallways, past the horrified guests, carrying the CEO of the Everhart Corporation in his arms. As Leo laid Amelia gently into the back of the waiting limousine, he looked down at her unconscious, beautiful face. He realized his heart was pounding not with fear of losing the money, but with the terrifying, unexpected realization that he hadn't just saved Lily. Somewhere along the way, he had started to love the lonely, cruel, paralyzed woman he had married. Amelia was stable, resting in the hospital's luxurious executive suite. The doctors attributed her collapse to acute stress. Leo stayed. He ignored the estate staff who called demanding his return. He was terrified of what he had started to feel for her, and he needed answers. He needed the walls Amelia had built to finally crumble. Late that night, while Amelia slept under heavy sedation, Leo crept into the secure medical filing cabinet in her private room. He knew the risk was enormous. This was an invasion of privacy, a breach of the contract, but his confusion and emerging love were driving him past logic. He found the file, Amelia Everhart's spinal injury assessment. He read the clinical language, his eyes scanning for the words that mattered. Spinal column intact. No physical damage to the nervous system. Then he saw it. Written clearly in a specialist's handwriting. Psychosomatic paralysis. The trauma of the accident hadn't broken her back, it had broken her will. Her mind had convinced her body that she was immobile. She wasn't lying. She was genuinely trapped. But the cage was invisible. Leo sagged against the wall, his anger dissolving into a profound, aching pity. She was the CEO of an empire, yet she was terrified, isolated, and faking her injury not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to find one honest person who would care for her without hoping she would walk again. He looked over at her still form. As he watched, Amelia sighed in her sleep, and Leo thought he saw the slightest, almost imperceptible twitch in her left foot. The truth was written in the silence of her body. Leo quietly replaced the file. He knew her secret now, but knowing the truth meant he had to protect her not just from her greedy family, but from her own shattered mind. He had married a lie, but he had fallen in love with the vulnerable woman hiding beneath it. Amelia was discharged 3 days later, exhausted but recovering. Uncle Robert, having witnessed Leo's genuine distress and protective action, became suddenly volatile. He knew that Leo's care was the key to Amelia's recovery, and Amelia's recovery meant the end of his inheritance hopes. Robert was waiting in the garage when Leo went to retrieve Amelia's motorized wheelchair. The garage was dark, vast, and silent, smelling of high-octane fuel and polished leather. Well, the devoted husband returns. Robert sneered. Stepping out from behind a pillar, he held a small, specialized wrench in his hand, his eyes red and frantic. I hear she's recovering. A miracle of true love. Isn't it? Or maybe. Robert's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. It's a miracle of mechanics. Leo saw it instantly. Robert had been tampering with the complex motor of Amelia's chair, severing a critical brake line. What are you doing? Leo roared, lunging forward. Robert moved with surprising speed, shoving Leo backward against a black limousine. I'm securing my future. Janitor. If she miraculously recovers, I get nothing if she has a terrible accident on the stairs tonight? Robert let the implication hang in the heavy air. Then the contract dictates you get the money, but I get the majority share of the board as the designated executor. Leo realized the full depth of the trap. Robert was using Leo's signed contract as a weapon, willing to murder Amelia and frame Leo as the reluctant beneficiary. Robert tossed the wrench onto the garage floor. Just be patient. Thorne, you'll be rich, and I'll be running the company. Don't ruin this for us. The contract expires in 2 days. 2 days, Leo, don't be a hero. Leo couldn't sleep. The chilling reality of Robert's attempted murder and the imminent end of the 1-year contract weighed on him. He had to stop Robert, but exposing him publicly would require revealing Amelia's psychological paralysis, which would destroy her reputation and authority on the board. Driven by desperation, Leo broke into Amelia's private study. He wasn't looking for money. He was looking for documentation. He found the lawyer's files, labeled succession planning. Inside, he found the final, complex draft of Amelia's last will and testament. It was clear she was leaving everything: the company, the fortune, the estate to her husband, Leo Thorne, citing his character and devotion. But the final page was blank. The signature line for Amelia Everhart remained hauntingly empty. The contract had only 2 days left. If Amelia died before signing, Robert would inherit control. If she recovered without signing, Robert would still be the one to challenge her legitimacy in court, backed by the board. Leo slumped into the CEO's chair. He didn't want the money. He didn't want the power. He just wanted Amelia safe, protected from the vultures and from the self-deception that kept her paralyzed. He held the unsigned will in his trembling hands, the key to a $50 million empire, worthless because of a woman's refusal to trust. He knew he had to confront her. Leo left the study, the unsigned will in his coat pocket. He walked toward Amelia's bedroom, his heart heavy. He was about to tell his wife that he knew her deepest, darkest secret, and that her own family had just tried to kill her. Leo found Amelia in her study, her hands resting motionless in her lap. The room was dark, lit only by the city lights filtering through the panoramic window. He slammed the unsigned will onto the glass desk, the sound echoing the violence in his heart. "You lied," Leo stated, his voice devoid of emotion. It wasn't physical. The paralysis, it was psychosomatic. Your mind locked you in that chair. Amelia didn't flinch. "I am still trapped, Leo. The reason is irrelevant." "And the reason for the contract," Leo continued, pulling the evidence of the sabotage from his pocket, the broken brake line Robert had tampered with. "Was that part of the test? Did you want Robert to kill you just so you could find out if I was truly honest? Amelia finally lifted her eyes, and there was an unexpected wetness in them. I needed to know if someone would stay because I was helpless, not because I was powerful. So I needed to know if someone cared about Amelia, not the CEO. You passed, Leo. You endangered your life for me. She sighed, reaching for the will and sliding it back toward him. The contract expires at midnight, but the inheritance doesn't depend on my death anymore. It depends on this signature. She handed him a diamond pen. Take it, Leo. Sign my name. You have the access, the motive, and the opportunity. You'll be CEO. You'll have everything. Leo looked at the document. $50 million, security for Lily's entire future. He looked at the trembling, beautiful woman who was offering him the world, testing his soul one final time. He picked up the pen, feeling the chilling weight of the diamond. He looked at the signature line where he could sign her name, committing the ultimate betrayal for the ultimate reward. He knew if he signed, Lily was safe, but he would lose Amelia forever. Quan Test Gem Tweechin, here is the final batch 5 of the novel script for The Wedding Pact. This completes the 6,000-word saga. Part 1. The long-form script batch 5. Chapter 13. The Final Choice. Leo found Amelia in her study, her hands resting motionless in her lap. The room was dark, lit only by the city lights filtering through the panoramic window. He slammed the unsigned will onto the glass desk, the sound echoing the violence in his heart. You lied, Leo stated, his voice devoid of emotion. It wasn't physical. The paralysis, it was psychosomatic. Your mind locked you in that chair. Amelia didn't flinch. I am still trapped. Leo, the reason is irrelevant. And the reason for the contract, Leo continued, pulling the evidence of the sabotage from his pocket, the broken brake line Robert had tampered with. Was that part of the test? Did you want Robert to kill you just so you could find out if I was truly honest? Amelia finally lifted her eyes, and there was an unexpected wetness in them. I needed to know if someone would stay because I was helpless, not because I was powerful. I needed to know if someone cared about Amelia, not the CEO. You passed, Leo. You endangered your life for me. She sighed, reaching for the will and sliding it back toward him. The contract expires at midnight, but the inheritance doesn't depend on my death anymore. It depends on this signature. She handed him a diamond pen. Take it, Leo. Sign my name. You have the access, the motive, and the opportunity. You'll be CEO. You'll have everything. Leo looked at the document. $50 million. Security for Lily's entire future. He looked at the trembling, beautiful woman who was offering him the world, testing his soul one final time. Micro hook. He picked up the pen, feeling the chilling weight of the diamond. He looked at the signature line where he could sign her name, committing the ultimate betrayal for the ultimate reward. He knew if he signed, Lily was safe, but he would lose Amelia forever. Chapter 14. The True Inheritor. Leo did not sign the will. With a roar that startled Amelia, he raised the document high above his head and violently tore it into a dozen pieces. The $50 million scattered across the polished floor like worthless confetti. I didn't marry a chair. Amelia, he yelled, tears of frustration and love burning in his eyes. I married you. I don't want your money. I want you to stand up and fight for your own life. I love you, and I won't be your executioner. The finality of his rejection, the complete abandonment of the fortune, did what years of therapy couldn't. The mental block shattered. Amelia gasped, a sound of profound relief. And slowly, agonizingly, she placed her feet flat on the ground. She gripped the arms of the wheelchair, and with a terrible, straining groan, she pushed herself up. She stood, shaky, wobbling, but standing. Just then the door burst open. Uncle Robert walked in, flanked by 2 lawyers, a cruel smirk plastered on his face. "Midnight? Amelia, the contract is void. I control the board." Robert froze. He stared at Amelia, who was standing upright, supported by Leo's steady arm. "You're cured." "Impossible." Amelia smiled, a fierce, triumphant smile that only a CEO could manage. "Not cured. Robert, just choosing to walk. And I made a decision. I didn't sign the old will." She looked at Leo. "My true heir has already been chosen. He didn't sign my will. He destroyed it." Security. Escort Mr. Robert off the property and ensure every one of his assets is audited by morning. Amelia leaned into Leo, who was weeping with relief and pride. "Welcome to the real marriage, husband," she whispered. "The one where we fight together." 1 year later. The Everhart estate was still opulent, but now it held a warmth it had never known. The vast lawns were littered with children's toys, and the grand halls echoed with laughter. Lily, now healthy and vibrant, wore a beautiful white dress. She was the flower girl. Leo and Amelia stood on the terrace overlooking the ocean, exchanging vows. This time, there were no lawyers, no contracts, and no ultimatums, only a judge and Lily. Leo wore a simple, well-fitted tuxedo. Amelia wore a simple gown, walking slowly and elegantly down a path lined with roses. Leo wasn't the CEO on paper. Amelia insisted on retaining that title, saying Leo's true value was his moral compass. Instead, he was the chairman of the Everhart Foundation, overseeing all charitable and medical endeavors, ensuring no child like Lily would ever be turned away again. They exchanged rings, Amelia placing a simple gold band on Leo's finger, replacing the expensive one he'd sold for Lily. Lily ran up to them after the ceremony, hugging Leo's leg. Then she looked up at her new stepmother. "Welcome to the family." "Sweet girl," Amelia said, kneeling down carefully, her recovered body still remembering the stiffness of the chair. "Thank you, Mom," Lily whispered, her voice clear and bright. Leo watched the 2 women he loved, realizing the greatest fortune he inherited wasn't the $50 million he tore up, but the unconditional love he had risked everything to earn. His sacrifice had not led to his death. It had led to his true life.